and welcome back, or just welcome if you're new here. I'm Common. I'm a crunchy mom, so to speak, to Elba, who's now 16 months old. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing the challenges that I had as a crunchy parent in my first year of parenting. First challenge, and let's start with the thing that happens first that sort of enters you into being a crunchy parent, and that is birth. For me, birth was this life-altering experience. It was something that was just so huge and like the most intense experience of my life. It was also something that I was really proud of because I had done a lot of birth preparation and it was hard. And that meant that I wanted to talk about it. But when I would talk about it, I quickly realized that not everybody likes to talk about birth. In my experience, most people didn't really want to have detailed conversations about birth, the experience of birth, like what I went through, what it meant to me, or even their birthing experience. For many people, birth is or it seems to be, the event that takes you from being pregnant to having your baby. And for me, the birthing experience is a ritual from maiden to motherhood. And it's an incredibly meaningful and significant experience that I recognized that I wanted to talk a lot about. And I didn't find that other people wanted to talk about it. So that's challenge number one. Sure, finding people where I want to talk about something and they're not necessarily interested in that. But more than that, it's kind of like on the one spectrum, someone is just not that interested in the process of birth and the birthing experience, even someone who's birthed a kid. But then on the other end, someone might not just be not into talking about it, but me being really excited or really passionate about discussing my home birth and how important that was to me can also offend people. Anyway, not to worry, I do have my village of people who do love talking about this stuff. It does resonate with them. There is free-flowing conversation where I'm not offending anybody, so I'm not complaining when I'm saying any of the things in this video. This video is purely for some funnies, maybe some relatability, and maybe some interest. Then next up is I guess explaining to people about the first 40 days when I was in the first 40 days. This one was surprisingly easy for me. I think other crunchy parents might have a harder time with this one, but it was easy for me because I had just moved to a new country where I didn't have many friends and family around me at the time that I was doing it. It wasn't as necessary for me to explain it to a bunch of people who wanted to come visit. But nonetheless, I still did have people who were coming into my space who I took the time to explain that I'm honoring the first 40 days. If you're coming to our house, I'm not gonna go out of my way to look presentable. In the first 2 weeks when somebody came into the space, which was just the midwives and the doula, my request was that they come up to our cave where we were honoring the first 40 days, aka our bedroom. I did none of the things that you typically do when you're going to receive a visitor because this is a sacred time and the importance of focusing on those things and people who are coming into my space. My request around that is that they honor this sacred time with me. Otherwise, it's also okay if they don't want to come into my space. Because odds are I might be half nude just with my baby, doing a lot of skin to skin and nursing and just being free and as comfortable as I can be in healing, bonding, and just being with my baby. The other need to explain, and again, I didn't really need to explain this to anybody, but I did not have anybody, other than the checkups, I didn't have anybody hold Elba at all. Maybe my body language said so, but I wasn't going to allow any of our visitors to hold her purely for holding her sake. Moving forward, I also don't think this is going to be a major challenge for me because the people that I have in my life, they know me. This resonates with them, and I think that we're on the same wavelength when it comes to this kind of stuff. But having chatted to other women, I really know that this is a big challenge that other crunchy parents face. That wasn't as big a challenge for me. Next up is probably the biggest challenge for me about being a crunchy parent. And this one I was not expecting to be such a unique thing that I was doing, or such a contrary to the norm thing. And that is not carrying my baby around in a car seat. This was huge. Like wherever I went, if I had any kind of appointment, I would ask them up front, like, do you have somebody who can hold my baby or somewhere I can put them? And they're like, oh yeah, you can just leave her in the car seat. I'm like, no, it can't because our car seat stays in the car. So that was at our pelvic floor physio appointment. I didn't do a lot of appointments in the initial stages simply because of the practicality, and also it wasn't necessary. But anytime I did, I recognized the uniqueness of holding my baby versus just carrying them around in their car seat. When Elba was around 9 weeks old, I started doing mom and baby yoga. I think I was one of 2 moms in a really big class that baby was not in a car seat. So awkward for me adjusting as a new mom. For whatever reason, the instructor asked us to have a lot of props. So like a bolster and then 4 different blocks and a blanket. And I would find it really difficult to gather those things where everybody else would put their baby down, baby's in the car seat, they'd gather those things and then maybe take their baby out or leave them in the car seat. I was like holding my baby like, oh, this is a little bit difficult. Anyway, the other challenge with a car seat that stays in the car, and this was a really intentional decision on our part. I don't regret it at all, but I'm so aware that it definitely is not the practical option, but it's important enough for me that I'm okay with it. But the other challenge is when your baby falls asleep and you just quickly need to walk somewhere. Like I bought something on Facebook Marketplace, so I drove to the person's house, and as I got there I saw that Elba was asleep and I just needed to walk like to the door. It happened another time when I was picking up something from a shop and I just needed to like walk inside, grab it and come. And I just recognized that's not a problem somebody would have if they were just picking up their car seat, walking it there and then bringing it back. But those were real challenges that I faced, I guess, for the entire first year, but I found that part in particular to be harder in the initial months. Then tying into that one leads me to my next biggest challenge, which is it's the same concept, but instead of being in the car, it's gonna be in the house. And that was our decision not to use baby containers. With the decision not to use baby containers, it made month 3 to 5 by far the most practically challenging months of my parenting experience. Like if anybody asks me what my biggest challenges were as a parent, I always say month 3 to month 5 and our intentional decision not to use baby containers. Again, I don't regret this decision. For future children, I'm going to do it exactly the same. I'm not going to use baby containers. I do believe it's so important for their body not to be in baby containers. However, it is a challenge because from month 3, Elba wanted to see what I was doing. She didn't want to just lie flat on a blanket anymore. She wanted to see and play and be in a more upright position. So she wanted to be held a lot so that she could be doing things with me and seeing what I was doing. So this is typically where somebody would use a baby container. They would put their child in like one of those bumbo seats or those like Beyond Borg, I think it's Beyond Borg bouncy chair kind of things, like those little elevated chairs like that. And then their kid would sit on their counter or on their floor watching them make dinner that way. We weren't elevating her and we weren't putting her into any of that stuff, which meant she wanted to be held a lot. And it was pretty impractical in terms of like getting household stuff done. Thankfully, that was only a challenge up until the point where she could sit. As soon as she could sit, then she could happily play independently while I was doing things in the kitchen. It's a short period of time, well, depending on when your kiddo decides to sit, but it for sure was really challenging. And it meant that my biggest asset in that time was my mom coming to visit and the use of baby carriers. Baby carriers were a lifesaver in that period in particular. But it is for sure a challenge to not put your baby in a bouncy chair. And the amount of times that I was given that advice, if I discussed like I'm having a hard time figuring out how to make food and how to get a few things done in the house. And people are like, oh yeah, I used one of those bouncy things or those like elevated chairs and worked so well. But we don't want to use them. So that's the challenge we face. It's a good reminder, and the thing that I share with other parents is it's a short period of time. It feels really long when you're in it, but it's not that long if that's the decision of course that you're making for your baby. I'm still on a similar topic. I'm going to move away from these topics, but they're kind of all tying in together. The next one is our decision to prioritize contact. We live in a society that, in my opinion, does not prioritize contact as much as what it is important to us. So with our prioritizing of contact, Elba was seldomly, when she was younger, away from us holding her. Did a lot of contact naps, not out of necessity, because people are like, oh yeah, the contact naps. They weren't out of necessity. They were out of a choice. Sometimes, sure, that's what she wanted, but other times it was just because we felt that was important. Now, the contact was the same for putting her in the car seat and then pushing her around a shop. We would hold her or she would be in a baby carrier. So again, the major challenge here is to get other stuff done while you are holding your baby. And then also the times that I realized what I'm doing is unusual is when I have conversations with other parents and they're like, oh, I went for a massage, or I went and did this other thing, or we went for date night, or like without the baby and so forth. And also the part of that touch and part of that connection was the decision to exclusively breastfeed, which also meant that I was always with Elba. And this stuff I did with love, but it was not easy to discuss my parenting challenges with other parents who weren't prioritizing this. They couldn't really share or ideas with me, and we were, I guess, very misaligned in our discussions of what I was finding challenging versus maybe the challenges that they were having. Then the other challenge with prioritizing contact is, like I mentioned, getting anything else done, but there's a different element to it, and that is our society's obsession with productivity and what our society values as productive. So to me, I understand that the most productive use of my time is to nurture my baby. But that doesn't mean that I'm oblivious to what society values. So you'll hear a lot of like, I wrote a book in my maternity leave, or you'll watch somebody else do a whole lot of things like revamp their website or other things and recognize like, I'm not doing that. I'm holding my baby with my two hands, so I can't be doing this. I'm sitting around a lot with ideas and maybe reading, but there's not a lot of output production going on for me. The challenge here is really what comes out in terms of our functioning in society and messages that we've heard around our worth and the value of us given output, productivity, what we're using our time on. Because when other people don't think that it's valuable for you to be sitting around with your baby, it isn't as easy for you to remember how important that is. And most of the solutions to all of the challenges I'm noting here is having a village, is having somebody else remind you why you made that decision and that you do believe it's incredibly important and incredibly valuable. And other people don't have to agree with that. But it is challenging when you're going through it in the moment, like day after day, watching and hearing what other people are doing with their time. And someone's like, oh, what have you been up to? And you're like, sit around holding my baby a lot. Doesn't sound very meaningful, but it is incredibly meaningful. Next one is elimination communication. I don't find that there's that much challenging about doing elimination communication other than the impracticalness of carrying around a potty. They're quite bulky, so don't fit into a diaper bag. And since we barely used our stroller in the first year, it was me with the potty. And then whenever I would get somewhere, it's like the decision, do I take it in? Do I not take it in? Do I think I'm gonna need it? Like, are people going to think I'm strange? Probably, because I've got like a 4-month-old and a potty. But anyway, bulky item. Most of my problems were solved there, as I have one in the car and I have one downstairs and have one upstairs. But the impracticalness was whenever I left the car and went somewhere. And then I guess the other challenge, but it's more like a funny one, is the misunderstandings that come from having a potty. Because some people would see my potty and not see that my baby is really tiny and then probably assume that I've got a toddler who's potty training, or someone once said, oh yeah, I also use the bumbo chair for my baby. And I'm like, it's not a bumbo chair. It's a potty. Anyway, all in all, I didn't find elimination communication to be a challenging aspect. I thought of my parenting decisions that I made, that one would be like very out there and strange or not as accepted. But weirdly enough, that one was people were very interested and curious, and It's always been a really nice connecting thing that I've done rather than some of my other decisions, which are not always that connecting. Okay, next up is the decision for her not to sleep anywhere other than in the same room as one of us at any given time. This one, in my mind, I didn't think would be so challenging because what I was picturing was nighttime sleep. Then I remembered babies nap a lot. And it's not the nighttime sleep one that's the more impractical one. It's the naps. So in terms of public health policy or public parenting policy or whatever, it is a recommendation in most places that a child not sleep by themselves in a room any given point in time until they are at least 6 months old. For us, this was at least 12 months old. We didn't follow the 6-month one. We went more with a safe infant sleep recommendation from James McKenna. But also we went on what feels for us an appropriate age for her to be sleeping by herself, because I didn't want her when she was super little to be waking up and have one of us not immediately be there for her to see us. So this changed how I experienced the first year of parenting versus somebody else who will speak about getting stuff done when their child naps, where I was getting stuff done when my child was awake, because when my child was napping, I was in the room with her, or she was napping in the baby carrier. It did mean that I needed to start to get creative about how to use my time, because as parents who've made this decision will know, and parents who just in general contact nap, be it out of choice or necessity, is that you can very easily just sit there scrolling your phone. And if you're doing that for days, weeks, maybe months, it's not great. It's not great for your well-being. It's not a great way to be using your time. And I've been there, so that's not a judgment. But the challenge there is, how do I use my time in a better way that feels good for me, given this decision that I've made? And this varied for me at various times. I tried different things. I used to try set up my laptop, then she'd have a real short nap, and I went through all this effort of setting up my laptop, which by the way is very bulky, loads of cords, etc., because it's like an editing laptop. So then I would try to read, but I'd have to keep the books away until she fell asleep, because she really liked books and paged through them, and when she was younger she would tear the pages. Eventually I ended up getting a tablet with a keyboard, which was the best way for me to be able to do a couple of things like emails, even some video calls and other things while I was there with her napping. And also we had a floor bed in my office, so she would take naps in my office while I would sit there working. If this is a decision you've made, you really understand how this differs so much from other people's parenting experience, and how you really have to think about, okay, what am I going to do in their nap time, or when nap time comes, where am I going to put them down, and do I have a hand? Do they want to nap on me? Can I put them next to me? Next up, the decision, no bottles, no pacifiers. This was a decision I was very happy with, but from a practical perspective, it meant, and still means, where I go, Elba goes. Where Elba goes, I go. It also means that I needed to focus on how to manage my rest in a way that I was not, this is more important in the initial months, but in a way that I was not wanting to rely on Ian to say give her a bottle so that I could get more sleep. I managed my rest so that this was something that didn't feel like a burden. Next up, cloth diapers. I speak about cloth diapers in other videos, so I don't want to talk about that much. What I will say, a challenge for me with cloth diapers is two things really. The first one, I so often forget to pack a wet bag in our diaper bag. I don't know what it is, but I so often forget that I need to put my diapers into something when we're out and about. Anyway, that was ridiculous how many times I've forgotten a wet bag. The other challenge, it's not a real big challenge because we're not big on traveling, especially not when she was little, is that the few times we did go somewhere, my requirement was always to make sure that where we went had a washer and a dryer. I didn't find that difficult, because also the way that we eat, we prefer a place to have a kitchen where we make our own food. Next up is a very important one, I think. And that is, I've touched on it a bit in this video, is conversational relatability. We're human, so we like to talk about the things that are important to us. So here's other moms with stuff like, oh, how do you get your baby to sleep through the night, or is your baby sleeping through the night? And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that because we breast sleep. So yes, technically she's asleep the whole night, but she's nursing a lot in the night. So I don't know how to answer that or really connect to any discussion around more mainstream ways of sleeping. Another one is recommendations for bum creams or rashes. And I'm like, we use cloth diapers, so no bum cream. And every now and again, if I felt it necessary, we use some tallow, no essential oils. And that's funny because on a crunch spectrum, you might still get the crunchies that really like essential oils. For me, it was beef fat, no essential oils on my baby. And then another example, there are loads of these. One of the big discussions is, have you enrolled Elba in daycare? And the waiting lists are hectic, like you need to find a good daycare, da 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 da. And I'm like, I have not, but I am knee deep into reading about unschooling and deschooling myself and really want to talk about it, but it's not relatable. So you can see how some people might not find me to be the most fun company. And the challenge is also, I like talking about the stuff that's important to me. I mean, I spend so much of my time reading up, gathering information, wanting to soundboard ideas with other people. But I also recognize that not only does someone not necessarily want to talk about those things, not necessarily interesting for them, I do find that I may be more particular with how I talk about it because I recognize that very easily can my passion and interest and excitement about something come across as judgment or criticism of somebody else's decision. It's like, oh, you know, I baked these muffins. My child's having one. Can your child have one? What goes through my head is various ways to respond to this in a way that I say my preference without it coming across as any kind of judgment or criticism. So for the most part, I might just stick to no thank you. If somebody wants me to elaborate, then it may be no thank you. We're not currently giving Elba any grains. And if somebody asks me why no grains, I will then also be very mindful to be tactful about how I speak about it, because I don't want to say stuff like, oh, I don't think grains are healthy for babies, because that the person just said they're giving that to their baby. I will be more particular with how I phrase it to say something like, I did this reading that I came across and it indicated this, this, and this reason. So therefore we are choosing not to give her grains. But I'm very aware of how I speak about things because I value connection in a conversation. I don't have an interest to criticize somebody else's parenting decisions, but I also believe in the importance of my parenting decisions and they're interesting to me and I want to talk about them. So it's not as simple as not caring about anything. Because I care. That's why I research this stuff so much. It's why it's important to me. So it's that balance of staying authentic to me and my values while recognizing that I respect that other people do things differently and wanting to communicate in a way that shows that respect. But it's a balance, and I'm for sure aware that how I communicate is very important, and it sometimes takes more capacity from me in a social interaction. So therefore I might limit the number of social interactions I have with people where we don't have a shared reality or shared interests or shared values in certain ways. But when you're talking to someone who's on a similar wavelength as you can just talk a lot more freely and you can be bouncing ideas and it's not coming off as a criticism or a judgment or anything like that. So that's a much easier situation to be in. The challenge there, I guess, is really building your community and also being mindful of who you choose to spend your time with and who you choose to interact with and finding that balance, because not everybody's even on the same kind of crunch level as you. So I have different mom friends where we share certain things that we value, but on other things we differ. And I really appreciate having numerous friends where there's different things that we're really sharing that interest on and really can discuss. I do limit the interactions I have with parents where we have almost nothing in common except for the fact that we're both parents. And that's purely because those social interactions for me, as someone, and I hate phrasing it this way, but I'm just gonna do it to cut to the chase in the video, as somebody who's more introverted and my energy
energy for social interactions is not overflowing. So I need to manage where I place that energy and who I choose to spend my time with. But I also started this by saying, I'm not the most fun company for some people. So that definitely means that some people just naturally choose not to spend time with me because my vibe doesn't resonate with them. And that is fine. That is great that people have different things. We shouldn't try to be friends with everybody. I'm coming up on soon ending this video. Just the last small points. One of them that I thought would be a challenge, but I thought it would be a challenge because I heard so many people talk about it being a challenge. I didn't find it to be a challenge, so there's not much I can say on this, but I'm going to note it anyway, and that is screen time. It's not been a challenge for us not to do screen time in the first year. No. I think it's more just the fact that we changed our habits around screen time, and there's never been a time that I was ever tempted to put her in front of a screen. So that's not been a challenge. It's also, I've never spent time with people where I needed to say, hey, do you mind turning the screen off or so. It's whenever I went in there, even if their kids were watching, they would turn it off. So I've never had the thing of, oh, what do I do now there's a screen on? So not a big challenge. Next one, and this is the second last thing. It's technically the last thing, but that is gift receiving. Now, for some crunchy parents, this might be really difficult because I am, like most crunchy parents, very particular about the toys that we have. I'm particular about two elements of it. The first element is that the toy must not entertain Elba. So it is a passive toy that she will play with actively. It must not be an active toy that sits there singing to her or bouncing around or making lights. Anything really that has batteries is a no-no. And then the second thing I'm particular about is what the toy is made of. So what material. And I try to stick to the natural, particularly less plastics, making sure like the paints and all that are non-toxic, etc., etc. But we still do get given gifts. And there's ways that parents can go about managing this or just saying their preferences and so forth. But gift receiving and giving is a big love language of mine. I love getting gifts and I love giving gifts. And I know that seems contrary to my like earthy, minimalistic, I don't know if I'm a minimalist. Anyway, more of my like anti-consumerism vibes, but I love to get gifts and give gifts. And I don't want to set parameters such that people feel like giving me a gift is a burden rather than something that feels good for them to do and they're excited about. So I have not told people, unless they asked me specifically, like, is there a category of something you want? I've not limited the gifts people give us or set those parameters. And amazingly, it's just kind of worked out that we received mostly gifts that I absolutely love. Sure, some of them are stuff that I wouldn't have purchased, and then Elba loves it, and it's fine. And it's fine for like 1 or 2% of her toys to be this plastic item I wouldn't have purchased. The stuff that I'm very particular about, I would just re-gift, or if I could return it, then I would return it. The toys that are entertaining for her, those ones I didn't bring into her space. But we received very few of those. And most of the gifts that we received, I was just so happy, especially living so far away from my family and friends, is that I really, really love when they gift something to Elba from afar and I can send them photos of her playing with it. That's very special for me. So gift giving, yes, it can for sure be a challenge as a crunchy parent, but I haven't found it to be a challenge. And that brings me now to the final note before I end off today's video. And that is, it's just a funny one. It's not uber serious. It's that before I had a kid, it wasn't obvious that I was not so mainstream. There were a few hints, but nothing really like stood out. Like people would see maybe my Vivo barefoot shoes, or they'd notice like something about me, but it was anyway, it wasn't as obvious. But then after I had a kid, it becomes very obvious that I'm a little granola. And I mean, it is what it is. These are the choices that I've made. I find my community where I fit in, but it's still for me funny to think about some of the challenges, but also, aside from being funny, sometimes the challenges are hard and you want someone who can relate to the particular challenges you have based off of the choices that you made. So I hope that's some of what you found and experienced while watching this video. I just want to thank you for watching this video and being with us here today. If you like this video, please like this video. And if you like my content in general, please remember to subscribe. Thanks so much.